The dynamite exploded 3 feet from Quinn Ashford's head when he was helping clear the collapsed silver mine shaft, and the world went from deafening chaos to absolute nothing in less than a heartbeat. He remembered the foreman shouting a warning, remembered turning his head just as the fuse burned faster than anyone expected, remembered the orange flash that seemed to swallow the mountain whole. Then silence. Complete, terrifying silence that pressed against his skull like water at the bottom of a deep well. Quinn hit the ground hard, his mouth open in what he assumed was a scream but couldn't hear. Men rushed toward him, their boots kicking up dust he could see but not hear hitting the earth. Their mouths moved in frantic shapes. Hands grabbed at his shoulders, but it was like watching a play through thick glass where all the sound had been stolen away. The doctor in Black Hawk, Colorado, examined him 3 days later in September of 1876, his weathered hands gentle. As they checked Quinn's ears, his eyes made him follow a finger back and forth. Quinn watched the old man's lips move, saw him shake his head, saw him write something down on a piece of paper and slide it across the desk. The blast damaged your hearing. It might come back in time or it might not. I have seen both outcomes. You need rest and no more explosions near your head. Quinn was 24 years old, and the silence felt like a grave. He had come to Black Hawk 2 years earlier from Missouri, drawn by the promise of silver in the mountains and the kind of honest work that paid a man enough to maybe start a life. He had been good at mining, good at the hard physical labor that left him exhausted and satisfied at the end of each day. He had been saving money, had been thinking about maybe buying some land, maybe finding a wife, maybe building something that lasted longer than a paycheck. Now he could not hear the creek that ran through town, could not hear the piano in the saloon, could not hear his own voice when he spoke, which made him speak less and less until he barely opened his mouth at all. The mining company gave him 2 weeks of pay and let him go. They needed men who could hear a warning shout, could hear the mountain shifting, could hear danger before it killed them. Quinn could not argue with the logic, even if it felt like being cut loose from the only anchor he had. He took the money and rented a small room above the general store, spending his days walking the mountains alone, watching the aspens turn gold as autumn crept down from the high peaks, existing in a world that had gone mute. That was when Olivia Lawson started leaving him notes. He first found one tucked under his door at the boarding house, a small rectangle of cream-colored paper folded once, and written in neat, careful handwriting. I heard what happened at the mine. I am sorry for your troubles. If you need anything from the store below, please come down and I will help you. Olivia Lawson. Quinn had seen her before, of course. Black Hawk was not a large town, just a collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside where Clear Creek cut through the valley, and the general store was the heart of what little commerce existed outside the mines. Olivia worked there with her father, a thin, serious girl with dark hair she kept pinned up and gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. She was maybe 22, quiet in the way Quinn had been quiet even before the explosion, the kind of person who watched and listened and thought before speaking. He had bought supplies from her a dozen times and had never managed more than a polite nod and a thank you. Now he stood in his small room holding her note, reading it 3 times, something uncomfortable and warm moving in his chest. He was not used to kindness that came without expectation. He folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. 2 days later, he went down to the store, needing coffee and flour and trying not to feel self-conscious about the way he could not hear the bell above the door when he entered. Olivia looked up from behind the counter where she was organizing jars of preserves, and her face brightened in a way that made her almost pretty, though Quinn thought that was probably an unkind way to think it because truthfully she was entirely pretty when she smiled like that. She reached for a pencil and paper immediately, writing quickly and turning it to face him. What can I help you find today? Quinn cleared his throat, heard nothing, and pointed at the coffee on the shelf behind her. She nodded and got it down, setting it on the counter, then wrote again. Anything else? He pointed at the flour. She added it to his purchases. He tried to count out the right coins, aware that he could not hear them clink against the counter, and she wrote another note. "You gave me too much. Here is your change." He took the coins, their faces almost touching across the counter, and he caught the faint scent of lavender soap. He wanted to say thank you, but was suddenly afraid of how his voice might sound when he could not hear it, so he just nodded. She wrote one more note before he could leave. "You are welcome here any time. I mean that." Quinn left with his supplies and her words both, and that night he sat at the small desk in his room and wrote her a reply, his handwriting rougher than hers but legible. "Thank you for your kindness. It has been a hard few weeks. I appreciate having somewhere I can go without people staring at me like I am broken. Quinn Ashford." He left the note at the counter the next morning before she opened, slipping it under the door like she had done for him. The exchange became a pattern. Every few days Quinn would find a note from Olivia, sometimes asking if he needed anything, sometimes just telling him small bits of news from town. "The Henderson baby was born yesterday. A healthy boy. Mrs. Henderson is doing well." Or, "My father says the first snow will come early this year. The animals are growing thick coats." Or, "I saw an elk on the mountain this morning, standing in the mist like something from a painting. I thought you might like to know." Quinn started writing back more often, his notes getting longer, less guarded. He told her about walking the high trails where he could see the whole valley spread out below, about how strange it was to watch the wind move through the pine trees and see their branches sway but hear nothing, about how he was learning to feel vibrations through his feet and hands, about how he could tell when someone was walking up behind him now by the way the floorboards shifted. He told her things he had not told anyone, and she wrote back with the same careful honesty, telling him about her mother who had died when Olivia was 16, about how she had learned to run the store in her mother's place, about how sometimes she felt like her whole life was the four walls of that building and the mountain view from the window. It went on through October and into November. Quinn found work doing odd jobs around town, things that did not require hearing. He chopped wood for the boarding house, repaired fences, helped build an addition onto the church. The work was simple, but it kept his hands busy and gave him enough money to get by. Between jobs, he would stop at the store, and Olivia would have coffee waiting for him, hot and strong, and they would sit at the counter passing notes back and forth like school children, except the notes were about real things, true things, the kinds of thoughts people usually kept locked away. One afternoon in mid-November, the first real snow falling outside in fat, wet flakes, Olivia wrote him a question that made Quinn's heart stutter. "Do you think your hearing will ever come back?" He hesitated, then wrote honestly, "The doctor says maybe, but I do not think so. It has been almost 3 months now, and if anything, the silence is more complete than it was at first. I think this is how my life will be now." She read his note, her gray eyes serious, and wrote back immediately, "Does that frighten you?" Quinn thought about lying, then did not. "Yes, every day. I feel like I'm living underwater, watching the world happen somewhere above me where I cannot reach it." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then wrote carefully, "You are not underwater. You are right here, and I can see you perfectly clearly." Something in Quinn's chest cracked open then, something he had been keeping carefully locked since the explosion. He reached across the counter and took her hand, just held it, his calloused palm against her smaller fingers, and she did not pull away. They stayed like that until her father came in from the stockroom, and Olivia gently extracted her hand and went back to organizing shelves. But her cheeks were flushed, and Quinn left the store feeling like he could breathe properly for the first time in months. The notes continued, but now they were different, softer around the edges, more honest in ways that made Quinn feel exposed and exhilarated all at once. Olivia told him she looked forward to his visits more than anything else in her day. Quinn told her that thinking about seeing her was the only thing that made him get out of bed some mornings. She told him she thought he was brave for keeping going after everything he had lost. He told her she was the least lonely person he had ever met, even though she spent most of her time alone. Winter settled into the mountains with serious intent. The snow piled high against the buildings, and the temperature dropped until Quinn could see his breath in his room, even with the small stove burning. The mines slowed down as they always did when the mountain passes became treacherous, and Black Hawk took on the quiet, waiting quality of a town hunkered down against the season. Quinn spent more time in the store, helping Olivia stack inventory, sweep floors, carry heavy crates her father was getting too old to manage easily. Her father, Samuel Lawson, was a taciturn man who said little even before Quinn lost his hearing, but he seemed to accept Quinn's presence without complaint, and occasionally would nod at him in what might have been approval. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when things changed again. Quinn was helping Olivia close up the store for the evening, taking down the shutters and locking them in place against the cold, when 3 men walked in through the front door. Quinn felt them rather than heard them, the vibration of their boots heavy and purposeful on the wooden floor. He turned and saw immediately that something was wrong. These were not local miners or townspeople. They were harder, rangier, with the look of men who had spent time riding rough trails and sleeping under stars for the wrong reasons. The one in front, a tall man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, said something to Olivia. Quinn could not hear the words, but he could read her body language perfectly. She had gone very still, her hands flat on the counter, her face carefully blank in the way people's faces got when they were frightened but trying not to show it. Samuel was in the back office doing the books. Quinn moved closer to Olivia, positioning himself between her and the men, and the scarred man's attention shifted to him. The man said something else, his mouth curling in what might have been amusement, and one of his companions laughed. Quinn kept his expression neutral, his hands loose at his sides. The scarred man reached past him toward Olivia, and Quinn caught his wrist, gripping it firmly but not aggressively, and shook his head once. The mood in the room changed instantly. The scarred man's face darkened, and he tried to yank his arm free, his mouth moving rapidly in what Quinn assumed were threats or curses. The other 2 men moved forward, their hands going to their hips where guns were holstered. Quinn held his ground, still gripping the scarred man's wrist, his eyes steady. He could not hear what they were saying, but he could see perfectly well what they were planning, and he was not going to let it happen. Olivia grabbed a piece of paper and wrote in large letters, holding it up where all the men could see, "My father is getting the sheriff. You should leave now." It was a bluff. Samuel was still in the office, unaware of what was happening, but the men did not know that. The scarred man wrenched his arm free finally, spat something at Quinn that made the other 2 laugh nastily, and all 3 of them turned and walked out. Quinn watched through the window until they mounted horses and rode toward the edge of town, then let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Olivia touched his arm, and when he looked at her, she was already writing. "Thank you. They have been in town for a few days. My father says they are probably just passing through, but to be careful. I think they were going to rob us." Quinn took the pencil from her hand and wrote back, "Are you all right?" She nodded, but he could see her hands were shaking. Without thinking too much about it, Quinn pulled her into his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, she leaned against his chest, her fingers curling into his shirt. They stood like that for a long time, and Quinn rested his chin on top of her head and felt her heartbeat against his ribs and thought that this was what people meant when they talked about finding home in another person. When Samuel came out of the office and saw them, he stopped, looked at Quinn for a long measuring moment, then nodded once and went to lock the front door properly. That night, Quinn walked Olivia and her father to their small house on the north edge of town, and Samuel shook his hand at the door, his grip firm and his eyes serious. Olivia wrote him one last note before going inside. "Sleep well. I will see you tomorrow." Quinn walked back to his room through the snow, the cold biting at his face, and for the first time since the explosion, he felt like maybe the silence was not the worst thing that had ever happened to him. If it had not happened, he might never have noticed Olivia Lawson. He might have stayed a solitary man working in the mines, saving his money, planning a future that never quite materialized. Instead, he had this, Whatever this was growing between them in the space created by folded paper and careful words. The next morning, Olivia was waiting for him at the store with coffee and a note already written. I could not stop thinking about you last night. Not because of the men, though, thank you again for that. But because I realized something. I do not want to keep writing notes forever. I want to hear your voice again. Quinn read it twice, then wrote back, I want that too, but the doctor said it might never happen. She wrote quickly, underlining certain words for emphasis. Then we will find another doctor, someone who knows more. Denver, maybe. There are real physicians there, people who have studied at universities back east. We cannot just give up. Quinn felt something like hope flicker in his chest, which was dangerous because hope could hurt worse than resignation when it did not pan out. But Olivia was looking at him with such determination, such absolute conviction that something could be done, that he found himself nodding. She smiled, bright and fierce, and wrote another note. We will figure this out together. The word together stayed with Quinn all day. They started making plans. Denver was a 4-day journey by wagon in good weather, longer in winter, but there was a stage that ran twice a week if the passes were clear. It would cost money that Quinn did not really have, but Olivia suggested he could work for her father through the winter and save up, and by spring they would have enough for the trip and to pay a good doctor. Samuel, when informed of the plan, merely grunted and said he could use the help anyway, and that Quinn should move his things into the small room behind the store instead of wasting money on the boarding house. So Quinn became a fixture at the Lawson General Store, working from dawn until well after dark, learning the business from the inside. He stocked shelves and inventoried supplies, dealt with customers using notes and hand gestures that became their own kind of language, fixed the leaking roof and reinforced the sagging front steps and built new shelving units in the stockroom. He learned which miners drank too much and needed to be cut off credit, which families were struggling and needed a little extra grace on their accounts, which travelers passing through were trustworthy and which needed watching. And every evening after the store closed and Samuel went home to his quiet house, Quinn and Olivia would sit together in the warm space near the stove and write notes to each other by lamplight. She told him about her dreams of maybe seeing the ocean someday, about how she had taught herself to read by practicing with her mother's old books, about how lonely it had been after her mother died and her father retreated into his grief. He told her about growing up with 4 brothers in Missouri, about how he had left because he wanted to be something other than the middle son on a failing farm, about how the silence sometimes felt like being erased from the world one sense at a time. She wrote him poetry she had memorized, long verses from Wordsworth and Longfellow that she copied out carefully so he could read them. He drew her pictures of the mountains as he saw them, rough sketches that somehow captured the way the light moved across the peaks at sunset. They played checkers using a board Samuel kept under the counter, communicating strategies through exaggerated facial expressions that made them both laugh silently. Christmas came and went quietly. Olivia gave Quinn a new leather-bound journal for his notes and drawings, and he gave her a carved wooden box he had made in the evenings when he could not sleep, inlaid with a pattern of aspen leaves. She looked at it for a long moment before writing, "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." And Quinn felt his face get hot with pleasure and embarrassment. On Christmas evening, after Samuel had gone home and they were alone in the store, Olivia took Quinn's hand and led him to the window where they could see the snow falling in the darkness outside. She wrote him a note, her handwriting a little shakier than usual. "I need to tell you something, and I'm nervous to write it down because once it is written, it becomes real and I cannot take it back." Quinn's heart was pounding hard enough that he wondered if she could feel it through his hand. He squeezed her fingers gently, encouragingly. She took a deep breath he could see but not hear, and wrote carefully, "I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I already fell. Past tense. It happened somewhere between the first note I left you and right now, and I do not know exactly when, but I know it is true. You do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know." Quinn took the pencil from her, his hand not quite steady, and wrote below her words, I fell in love with you the day you first held my hand across the counter. Maybe before. I was just too afraid to admit it. I have nothing to offer you, no real job, no prospects, no hearing. But if you will have me anyway, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy. Olivia read his words, then looked up at him with tears in her eyes, and Quinn wiped them away with his thumb, cradling her face in his palm. She turned her head and kissed his wrist, just above where his pulse was beating hard and fast. And then she stood on her toes and kissed him properly on the mouth. And Quinn forgot about the silence entirely because this was its own language, this touch and warmth, and the feeling of her arms around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Olivia wrote another note, her handwriting rushed and happy. I will have you exactly as you are. They told Samuel the next morning, sitting in the kitchen of his small house with coffee going cold in their cups. Quinn was terrified, unable to hear the man's response, watching his face for any sign of anger or disapproval. But Samuel just looked at his daughter for a long moment, then at Quinn, and finally nodded slowly. He wrote on the paper Olivia had brought, I knew this was coming. You are a good man, Quinn Ashford. You have my blessing, assuming your intentions are honorable. Quinn wrote back immediately, I want to marry her, if she will have me, as soon as possible. Samuel read it and allowed himself a small smile. Then we should plan a wedding. Spring, perhaps, after you get back from Denver and see that doctor. The winter months that followed were the happiest of Quinn's life despite the continued silence. He and Olivia worked side by side every day, their movements synchronized in the way of people who had learned to communicate without words. She would look at him, and he would know she needed him to reach something on a high shelf. He would glance at the door, and she would know he was worried about a customer's intentions. They developed their own shorthand of gestures and expressions, a private language that belonged only to them. In the evenings, they would sit close together near the stove, writing notes or reading or simply existing in each other's presence. Sometimes Olivia would rest her head on Quinn's shoulder, and he would put his arm around her waist, and they would watch the fire burn down to embers without needing to say anything at all. Sometimes they would kiss for long stretches of time, learning the taste and feel of each other, and Quinn would think that if he never heard another sound for the rest of his life, he would still consider himself the luckiest man in Colorado. February brought a cold snap that froze the creek solid and kept most people indoors. The store was quiet, and Samuel started teaching Quinn the business side of things, showing him how to keep the books, how to order supplies, how to negotiate with the mining companies and traveling merchants. Quinn learned quickly, his mind sharp even if his ears were useless, and Samuel seemed satisfied with his progress. More than once, Quinn caught the older man looking at him with something like affection, which made his chest feel tight because his own father had never looked at him like that. March came in like the saying promised, with winds that howled down from the high country, bringing one last massive snowstorm. They were snowed in for 3 days, and Quinn stayed at the store rather than trying to make it back to his room in the blizzard. He and Olivia and Samuel played cards and ate through their supplies of jerky and hardtack. And on the second night, Olivia fell asleep against Quinn's shoulder, and he carried her to her small cot in the storage room and covered her with a blanket. When he turned to leave, Samuel was watching him, and the old man wrote a note. You love her truly. I can see it. That gives me peace. Quinn wrote back, meaning it with everything in him. I will take care of her for the rest of my life. I swear it. Samuel nodded, and they shook hands, and Quinn thought that was probably as close as the old man got to openly expressing emotion. When the snow finally melted enough to clear the roads, word came that the stage to Denver would be running again starting in April. Quinn and Olivia began preparing in earnest, saving every penny they could spare, writing letters ahead to physicians in Denver to see who might be able to help. Most of the replies were discouraging. Hearing loss from explosion trauma was poorly understood, and many doctors said there was nothing to be done. But one physician, a Dr. Marcus Chen who had studied in San Francisco and corresponded with specialists in Europe, wrote back saying he would be willing to examine Quinn and see if anything could be attempted. They booked passage on the first stage leaving in April, and Samuel agreed to watch the store while they were gone. The morning they left, Quinn shook the old man's hand, and Olivia kissed her father's cheek, and they climbed into the coach with their small bags and hopes that felt too fragile to examine too closely. The journey to Denver took 5 days instead of 4 because of muddy roads from the snowmelt. The stage was cramped and uncomfortable, bouncing over ruts and rocks that made Quinn's teeth rattle. But Olivia sat pressed against his side the whole way, her hand in his, and they passed notes back and forth about the changing landscape, the way the mountains gave way to rolling foothills, and then the flat expanse of the plains. At night they stayed in small way stations along the route, taking separate rooms because they were not yet married. Though Quinn lay awake both nights thinking about the fact that she was just on the other side of a thin wall, so close and yet impossibly far. Denver was bigger than Quinn had imagined, a real city with brick buildings and paved streets and more people than he had seen in one place since leaving Missouri. The noise that he could not hear must have been tremendous because everyone seemed to be in motion. Wagons and horses and pedestrians all mixing together in controlled chaos. Olivia kept a tight hold on his hand as they navigated to the address Dr. Chen had provided, a neat brownstone on a tree-lined street that spoke of education and prosperity. Dr. Chen was a compact man in his 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. He examined Quinn thoroughly, using instruments Quinn had never seen before, shining lights in his ears, making him follow moving objects with his eyes, pressing on points on his head and neck. The examination took over an hour, and when it was done, the doctor sat down at his desk and wrote out a long explanation while Quinn and Olivia waited, with their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles were white. Finally, Dr. Chen turned his paper around so they could read. The damage is to your inner ear, specifically to the structures that transmit sound to your brain. The blast wave essentially shattered these delicate bones and membranes. In most cases, this damage is permanent. However, there is a new surgical technique that has shown some promise in cases like yours. It involves going in through the ear canal and attempting to reconstruct or bypass the damaged structures. I will be honest with you. It is dangerous, expensive, and has only been successful in about 1 case out of every 4 I have attempted. The other 3 resulted in no change, or in one case, made things worse. If we attempt this, and it fails, you could lose what little capacity for hearing you might naturally recover. But if it succeeds, you could regain most or all of your hearing over time. Quinn read it 3 times. Olivia read it twice, then wrote on a fresh piece of paper how expensive and how dangerous exactly. Dr. Chen wrote back, $300 for the surgery and recovery care. As for danger, there is a risk of infection which could spread to the brain, a risk of further permanent damage, and a small risk of death from complications. I would put that last risk at less than 5%, but it exists. $300 was more money than Quinn had saved. It was more than he and Olivia had together. It was a fortune, the kind of money that would take years to accumulate working at the store. He felt the hope that had been building since they left Blackhawk start to crumble, and he could not quite keep the despair off his face. Olivia was writing rapidly, her pencil moving fast and hard across the paper. She showed her note to Dr. Chen. If we could come up with the money, when would you do the surgery? The doctor wrote, I have an opening next week. After that, I'm traveling to San Francisco for 3 months and would not be available until late summer. Olivia nodded, her face set in determined lines, and wrote another note just for Quinn. We will find the money. Do not give up yet. They left the doctor's office in a daze and found a small boarding house where they could stay cheaply. That evening they sat in the plain dining room with paper spread between them, doing calculations that never came out in their favor. Even if they sold everything they owned, even if Samuel helped, they could not come up with $300 in a week. Quinn felt the weight of impossibility settling over him like the snow that buried Blackhawk every winter. But Olivia would not accept defeat. She went out the next morning while Quinn stayed at the boarding house, and when she came back hours later, she had a strange expression on her face. She wrote him a long note. I went to several banks and finally found one that would consider a loan, but they need collateral. something valuable to hold against the debt. I told them about the store, about my father's business. They said if my father would sign the store over as collateral, they would loan us the money. We would have 5 years to pay it back with interest. If we miss payments, the bank takes the store. Quinn felt his stomach drop. No, absolutely not. That store is your father's life. Your life. I will not risk it. We will find another way, Olivia wrote back, her handwriting fierce. There is no other way, not in time. And I already sent my father a telegram. His reply came an hour ago. She pulled a telegram from her pocket and showed it to Quinn. The message was short, in Samuel's typical style. Use the store, get Quinn fixed. We will manage the debt. Do it. Quinn read the telegram and felt his eyes burn. I cannot let you do this, either of you. It is too much. Olivia grabbed his face in both hands, making him look at her, and her eyes were blazing. She wrote one more note, pressing the pencil so hard the letters indented the paper beneath. You are not letting us do anything. We are choosing this. I am choosing this. Because I love you and I cannot stand the thought of you living in silence for the rest of your life when there is even a small chance we can fix it. Please, let us help you. Quinn kissed her then, not caring that they were in the public dining room, not caring about anything except the fact that this woman loved him enough to risk everything. When they pulled apart, he took the pencil and wrote simply, Okay, thank you. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. The next 3 days were a blur of paperwork and preparations. Samuel sent the deed to the store by expedited courier, and the bank processed the loan with surprising efficiency. Olivia stayed with Quinn constantly, helping him prepare, writing him encouraging notes, distracting him when he started to panic about the upcoming surgery. They walked through Denver's streets hand in hand, looking at shop windows, eating at restaurants where Quinn could point to the menu, and Olivia would tell the waiter what they wanted, existing in their own quiet bubble, while the city moved around them. The night before the surgery, lying in his narrow bed at the boarding house, Quinn could not sleep. He kept thinking about the 5% chance Dr. Chen had mentioned, the possibility that he might not wake up at all. It seemed desperately important that he tell Olivia everything he had not yet said, even though they had been communicating constantly for months. He got up and lit a candle and pulled out the journal she had given him for Christmas, and he wrote her a letter that covered 6 pages, telling her everything he loved about her, everything he hoped for their future, everything he was grateful for. He wrote about wanting to marry her in a church with wildflowers, about wanting to build her a house with a view of the mountains, about wanting to have children with her and grow old watching them grow up. He wrote that if something went wrong tomorrow, she should know that these last months with her had been the best of his life, and he would go to whatever came next with no regrets because he had known what it was to be truly loved. He sealed the letter and put it in his bag where she would find it if things went wrong. The surgery took place in Dr. Chen's surgical suite, a clean, bright room that smelled of carbolic acid and something medicinal Quinn could not identify. The doctor had him lie on a table and gave him a cloth to breathe through, something soaked in a chemical that made Quinn's head swim. Olivia held his hand until the very last moment, and the last thing Quinn saw before the darkness took him was her face, her lips forming words he could not hear but understood anyway. I love you. Come back to me. Then nothing. Quinn woke in stages, consciousness returning in pieces. First the awareness that he was lying down, then the awareness that his head hurt with a deep, throbbing pain that seemed to originate from inside his skull. Then the awareness that someone was holding his hand. He opened his eyes and found Olivia sitting beside him, her face exhausted and tear-streaked. And when she saw he was awake, she squeezed his hand so hard he thought bones might crack. She grabbed paper and wrote frantically, "You are okay. The surgery is done. Dr. Chen says it went as well as could be expected. You have been asleep for 8 hours. How do you feel?" Quinn tried to answer and found his mouth was dry as dust. Olivia held a cup of water to his lips and he drank carefully, then took the pencil from her. "Head hurts, but I am alive." She laughed, a silent exhalation he could see but not hear, and wrote, "Yes, very much alive. You scared me." He pulled her down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the lavender soap smell of her, grounding himself in her presence. Dr. Chen came in a few minutes later and checked Quinn's bandages, his eyes, his responses, and finally wrote out a note. "The surgery went well. I was able to reconstruct some of the damaged structures and clear out scar tissue that was blocking others. Now we wait. It may take weeks or even months before you know if it worked. The healing must happen before hearing can return. I want you to stay in Denver for at least 2 weeks so I can monitor your recovery. After that, you can go home, but you must be very careful. No loud noises, no physical labor, no anything that might jar or damage the surgical site. Understood?" Quinn nodded, then regretted it as pain spiked through his head. He wrote carefully, "Understood. And thank you. Regardless of how this turns out, thank you for trying." Dr. Chen smiled slightly and wrote back, "You have a remarkable woman there. She refused to leave your side even when I told her she should rest. Hold on to her." Quinn looked at Olivia, who was blushing, and wrote, "I intend to." The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Quinn's head healed in increments, the pain gradually fading to a dull ache and then to nothing. Dr. Chen changed his bandages every few days, checking for infection, pleased with the progress. Quinn tried several times to hear something, anything, straining so hard his jaw would ache, but there was nothing. Just the same complete silence he had lived with for the last 7 months. Olivia never let him despair for long. She kept him distracted with walks through Denver, with card games and notes and descriptions of all the things they would do when they got back to Black Hawk. She wrote him stories about their future, elaborate fantasies about the house they would build, and the children they would have, and the life they would make together. Quinn read every word and held on to them like promises. On their last day in Denver, Dr. Chen removed the bandages for the final time and examined Quinn's ears with a satisfied expression. He wrote out his final instructions. "Everything looks good. The healing is excellent. Now it is just a matter of time. Some patients report hearing returning gradually over weeks or months. Some wake up one day and it is just back. Some never recover hearing at all. There's no way to predict. But you have the best chance I could give you. Go home, live your life, and be patient." They thanked the doctor profusely, and Quinn shook his hand for a long time, trying to convey gratitude that went beyond words. Then they collected their bags and boarded the stage back to Black Hawk, beginning the long journey home. Quinn spent the trip watching Olivia, memorizing the way the light fell across her face, the way she would catch her lower lip between her teeth when she was thinking, the way she looked at him like he was something precious and worth saving. He thought about the letter he had written before the surgery still tucked in his bag and decided he would give it to her anyway, not as a farewell, but as a promise. That evening at a way station somewhere in the foothills, he presented her with the folded pages. She read them by lamplight while Quinn watched, and when she finished, she was crying openly, tears streaming down her face. She wrote him a shaky note. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever read, you foolish man, you wonderful, perfect foolish man. We are going to have all of this, I promise you, all of it." Quinn kissed her tears away and held her until she stopped shaking, and that night, he asked the way station keeper if there was a preacher anywhere nearby. The keeper wrote back that there was a circuit preacher due to come through the next morning. Quinn looked at Olivia and wrote, "Marry me tomorrow. I do not want to wait anymore. We can have a big ceremony later if you want, but I need you to be my wife now." Olivia did not hesitate. She wrote back, "Yes, tomorrow, right now if we could." The circuit preacher married them the next morning in the way station's common room, with the station keeper and his wife as witnesses. Quinn could not hear the words of the ceremony, but he could see Olivia's lips forming her vows, could feel the weight of the simple ring he slid onto her finger, could taste the salt and sweetness when she kissed him as his wife. They signed the marriage certificate with shaking hands, and Olivia wrote him a note afterward. Mrs. Quinn Ashford. I like how that sounds. Quinn wrote back, not half as much as I like saying it. My wife. They had one night together as husband and wife before reaching Black Hawk, spending it in a small private room at the next way station, and Quinn learned that there were ways of communicating that went far beyond words or notes or hearing. He learned the language of touch and breath and heartbeat, the way Olivia's body moved against his, the way she looked at him in the lamplight like he had hung the stars just for her. He learned that silence could be its own kind of intimacy, a space where nothing existed except the two of them and the promises they had made. They arrived back in Black Hawk on a warm afternoon in late April, the aspens just starting to leaf out in pale green. Samuel was waiting at the store, and when he saw them, his face split in a rare, genuine smile. He hugged his daughter fiercely, shook Quinn's hand, and then read the note Olivia had written explaining that they had gotten married. The old man's eyes got suspiciously bright, and he wrote back, "About time. I was wondering if you two would ever stop dancing around each other. Welcome to the family, son." That word, son, hit Quinn harder than he expected. He had to turn away for a moment to collect himself, and when he turned back, Samuel clasped his shoulder in silent understanding. They fell back into the rhythm of the store easily, though now Quinn slept in the small room with Olivia instead of alone, and waking up next to her every morning felt like a gift he had not earned but was grateful for anyway. He went back to work helping Samuel run the business, and Olivia went back to managing the inventory and dealing with customers, and on the surface everything looked the same as it had before they left, except Quinn was listening for sounds that did not come. Every morning he would wake up hoping that maybe today would be the day. He would strain his ears, willing himself to hear something, anything. The creak of the floorboards, the wind in the eaves, Olivia's breathing beside him. But there was nothing. Just silence, complete and absolute as it had been since the explosion nearly 8 months ago. May passed into June. The high country thawed and the mines opened back up fully. Black Hawk came alive with activity, and Quinn and Olivia worked long hours to keep up with the demand for supplies. They were paying down the loan to the bank, a little bit each month, and Samuel assured them they would have it cleared in the 5 years if they were careful. Quinn tried not to think about the fact that his wife and father-in-law had bet everything on a surgery that appeared to have failed. In late June, on an evening when the store was closed and they were sitting on the front steps watching the sun set behind the mountains, Olivia took Quinn's hand and placed it on her stomach. He looked at her questioningly, and she wrote him a note with her free hand. "I am pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think. We're going to have a baby." Quinn stared at the note, then at her, then back at the note. A baby, his and Olivia's, a child who would grow up in a world Quinn could not hear, who would speak words Quinn might never be able to hear. The joy and terror of it hit him simultaneously, and he pulled Olivia into his arms and held her while his shoulders shook with silent sobs he could not control. She wrote him another note when he finally released her. "Are you happy?" He wrote back, "More than I ever thought possible, and more terrified than I have been since the surgery. What if I cannot hear our child? What if they call for me and I do not know?" Olivia framed his face with her hands, making him look at her, and she wrote with fierce certainty, "Then we will figure it out. The same way we have figured out everything else. With notes and signs and love, our child will grow up knowing both of us love them, hearing or no hearing. That is what matters." Quinn nodded and kissed her, tasting the truth in her words even as fear still gnawed at his edges. July was hot and dry, the kind of weather that made the mountains shimmer in the afternoon heat. Olivia started showing, her body changing in subtle ways that Quinn found endlessly fascinating. She would catch him staring and write teasing notes about how he needed to get back to work instead of watching her all day. He would write back that he was working, studying the most important thing in his life. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-July, unremarkable in every way, when Quinn woke up before dawn with a strange feeling in his head. Not pain exactly, but a pressure, a sense of something shifting deep in his skull. He lay still, afraid to move, and then he heard it. Breathing. Soft, quiet, rhythmic breathing. Olivia's breathing. Quinn's eyes snapped open in the darkness, and he held his own breath, straining every sense. There it was again. The slight inhale and exhale, the gentle sound of air moving through lungs and past lips. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in his life. He lay frozen for several minutes, terrified that if he moved, the sound would disappear and this would turn out to be some cruel dream. But it stayed constant and real, and slowly Quinn became aware of other sounds. The creak of the building settling, the rustle of fabric as Olivia shifted in her sleep. The distant sound of something, maybe wind, maybe the creak. He could not tell yet, but it was sound. Real, actual sound. Quinn sat up carefully, and the sound of his own movement, the rustle of blankets and squeak of the bed frame, made him gasp. Olivia stirred at his movement and opened her eyes, and when she saw his face, she sat up quickly, reaching for paper and pencil. But before she could write anything, Quinn spoke, hearing his own voice for the first time in 8 months. "I can hear you breathing," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, hoarse from disuse and rough with emotion. "Olivia, I can hear you." She dropped the pencil and stared at him, her eyes going wide, and then she laughed, and Quinn heard that too, the breathy, joyful sound of her laughter. She threw her arms around his neck and he held her while she cried and laughed at the same time, and he could hear every sound she made, every sob and breath and whispered word. "Can you really hear me?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. "Truly?" "Yes," Quinn said, his voice cracking. "Not perfectly. It sounds far away and muffled like I am underwater, but I can hear. God, Olivia, I can hear." They woke Samuel by pounding on his door at dawn, both of them talking over each other excitedly, and the old man stood in his nightshirt looking confused until Quinn said, "I can hear you. My hearing is coming back." Samuel's face went slack with shock, and then he grabbed Quinn in a bear hug that drove the air from his lungs. "I will be damned," the old man said, his voice thick. "That doctor actually did it." The hearing came back gradually over the next several weeks. At first, everything sounded distant and hollow, like Quinn was at the bottom of a well listening to the world above. But day by day it got clearer, sharper, until he could have conversations without having to strain, could hear customers in the store, could hear the piano in the saloon, and the creek running through town, and the wind in the high pines. The first time he heard Olivia say, "I love you," out loud, not written, but spoken in her soft, clear voice, Quinn wept openly. The first time he heard Samuel laugh at something Quinn said, a rusty sound that suggested the old man did not laugh often, Quinn felt a rush of affection so strong it took his breath away. The first time he heard church bells on Sunday, the sound carrying across the valley clear and bright, Quinn stood in the street and listened until they stopped ringing, committing every peal to memory. But the best sounds were the ones that came at night, lying in bed with Olivia. The sound of her heartbeat when he pressed his ear to her chest. The sound of her voice when she would tell him about her day, or read to him from books, or just talk for the sake of talking, making up for months of silence. The sound of their baby's heartbeat when the doctor let Quinn listen through a stethoscope, fast and strong like a tiny drum. August brought a late summer storm that rolled through the mountains with thunder that made Quinn flinch instinctively. The first time he had heard thunder since before the explosion. Olivia found him standing on the porch of the store, listening to the rain hammer on the roof, the water pouring off the eaves, the crack and rumble of lightning and thunder echoing through the valley. She slipped her hand into his and said, "Beautiful, is it not?" "Everything is beautiful," Quinn said, turning to look at her, at the way her hair was starting to curl in the humidity, at the swell of her stomach under her dress. "Every single sound. I will never take it for granted again." She kissed him there on the porch, with the rain pouring down around them and the thunder rolling overhead, and Quinn thought that this was what happiness felt like, this overwhelming gratitude for ordinary miracles, Their son was born in February of 1877 on a morning when fresh snow blanketed the mountains and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. The birth took 12 hours, and Quinn stayed with Olivia the entire time, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, listening to her breathe through contractions that he could hear building in the way her breath would catch and quicken. The midwife worked efficiently, and when the baby finally came, red-faced and squalling, Quinn heard his first cry and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, and she placed the baby on Olivia's chest. Olivia looked exhausted and elated, and more beautiful than Quinn had ever seen her. And when she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, she said, "We have a son." Quinn reached out with a trembling hand and touched the baby's tiny fist, and the infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Hello," Quinn said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I am your father, and I can hear you. I can hear every sound you make." They named him Samuel Quinn Ashford, after both his grandfathers, and called him Sam. He was a good baby, healthy and loud when he wanted to be fed, and remarkably content the rest of the time. Quinn would sit with him for hours, holding him against his chest, listening to every coo and gurgle and sigh, sounds that other fathers probably took for granted, but Quinn treasured like gold. Samuel Sr. was completely besotted with his grandson, a side of the old man Quinn had never seen before. He would hold the baby with a gentleness that seemed impossible from his work-roughened hands, and he would tell Sam stories about his grandmother, about the woman Olivia had grown from, about all the things he would teach the boy when he was old enough. Quinn would listen and feel grateful that his son would grow up knowing this kind of love. Spring came again, the aspens budding green, and the wildflowers starting to bloom in the high meadows. Quinn and Olivia had paid down a significant portion of their loan to the bank, and Samuel said at their current rate they would have it cleared in 4 years instead of 5. Business was good, the store thriving, and their small family felt complete in a way Quinn had never experienced growing up. One evening in late May, when Sam was 3 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Quinn and Olivia sat on the porch of their store watching the sunset. They had barely spoken all day, just moved around each other with the ease of long practice, but now Quinn reached for her hand and said, "Do you remember when you left me that first note, after the explosion?" Olivia smiled, her thumb rubbing across his knuckles. "Of course. I was so nervous. I thought you might think I was being forward or inappropriate." "I thought you were an angel," Quinn said honestly. "I thought maybe I had died in the explosion, and you were some kind of reward I had not earned." She laughed softly. "An angel who works in a general store and has ink perpetually on her fingers." "The best kind," Quinn said. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the evening sounds around them, the birds settling in for the night, the creek murmuring over stones, the distant sound of voices from town. Then he said, "I have been thinking about what to say to you, some grand speech about gratitude and love and how you saved my life. But every time I try to write it or even think it, it feels inadequate." "Then do not say anything grand," Olivia said, squeezing his hand. "Just tell me what you are thinking right now." Quinn considered, then said simply, "I am thinking that I am glad the explosion happened." Olivia turned to look at him sharply. "Quinn, I know how that sounds," he interrupted gently. "But if it had not happened, I would still be just another miner. I would have never really noticed you beyond being the woman who sold me supplies. I would have missed this entire life. So yes, I am glad it happened because it led me here, to you, to Sam, to everything that matters." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. And you have said quite a few romantic things." "I have had a good teacher," Quinn said, pulling her close. "You taught me how to communicate when I thought I never would again. You taught me that silence can be a gift if you use it to really listen. You taught me that love does not need sound to exist, but it sure is nice to be able to tell you I love you and hear you say it back." "I love you," Olivia whispered against his shoulder. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Good," Quinn said, kissing the top of her head. "Be frightened. I am frightened every day by how much I have to lose now, but I would rather be frightened and have this than safe and have nothing." They sat there as the sky darkened and the stars came out, listening to the night sounds and the soft breathing of their son sleeping inside, and Quinn thought that this was the definition of home. Not a place but a person, not silence but all the sounds that made a life. The years that followed were good ones. Sam grew into a bright, curious boy who learned to read at his grandmother's knee, or rather at the counter of the store where Olivia would teach him letters using the labels on cans and boxes. He had his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn determination, and he adored his grandfather Samuel, following the old man around the store, asking endless questions about everything. When Sam was 3, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Clara after Olivia's mother. She was smaller than Sam had been, with dark hair like Quinn's, and a temperament that was somehow both fierce and gentle. Sam took to his role as big brother with seriousness, always watching over Clara, always making sure she was safe. Samuel Sr. lived to see both his grandchildren grow into toddlers, and then one morning in the spring of 1880 he simply did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, and Quinn thought that was probably how the old man would have wanted it, no fuss or drama. They buried him in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Black Hawk, and Quinn gave a eulogy in which he called Samuel the finest man he had ever known, the father he had needed and found. Sam, not quite 4 years old, put a handful of wildflowers on the grave and said, "Goodbye, Grandpa, I will remember your stories." The store became Quinn and Olivia's fully after that, their names on the deed once the bank loan was finally paid off in 1881. They expanded it slowly over the years, adding a section for hardware, another for fabric and sewing supplies that Olivia specialized in. Sam and Clara grew up behind the counter, learning the business the same way Olivia had, and Quinn would sometimes watch them and marvel at how different his life had turned out from anything he could have imagined when he was a young man working in the mines. His hearing remained good, not perfect, but functional. He had some trouble with very quiet sounds and sometimes struggled to understand speech in loud environments, but overall, Dr. Chen's surgery had been a remarkable success. Quinn never took it for granted. Every time he heard his children laugh, every time he heard Olivia singing while she worked, every time he heard the mountains settling in for winter, he sent a silent thank you to the universe for giving him this second chance. Sometimes he would pull out the old journal Olivia had given him that first Christmas, the one filled with notes they had written to each other during those silent months, and he would read through them with wonder. The notes documented the growth of their love in real time, from tentative friendship to deep affection to the kind of partnership that sustained them through everything life threw at them. He kept the journal in a safe place, thinking that someday when Sam and Clara were grown, they might want to read it, to understand how their parents had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy. In 1885, when Sam was 8 and Clara was 5, Quinn took his family on a trip to Denver. They visited Dr. Chen, who was delighted to see how well Quinn had recovered and how beautiful his family was. The doctor had aged, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and he examined Quinn one more time, checking his hearing, testing his responses. Finally, he sat back and wrote a note. "Old habits dying hard. You are a success story, one of the best outcomes I have ever had. I am proud to have been part of your journey." Quinn shook his hand and introduced his children, and Sam said with the perfect confidence of childhood, "Thank you for fixing my father's ears so he can hear us." Dr. Chen smiled and said, "It was my pleasure, but the real credit goes to your mother. She is the one who refused to give up." That evening, back at their hotel, Quinn and Olivia put the children to bed and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Quinn pulled Olivia into his lap and said, "Do you ever regret it? Risking everything for me?" "Never," Olivia said immediately. "Not for a single second. You are the best decision I ever made, Quinn Ashford." "I am pretty sure I am the one who made the decision," Quinn teased. "I asked you to marry me, remember?" "Only after I left you that first note," Olivia countered. I made my intentions clear from the beginning." Quinn laughed, the sound rich and full, and pulled her closer. "Fair enough. You did chase me rather aggressively." "I did no such thing," Olivia protested, but she was laughing too. "I merely made myself available." "Is that what we are calling it?" Quinn kissed her neck, making her shiver. "Making yourself available?" "Stop that," Olivia said without any real conviction. "The children are right in the next room." "They are asleep," Quinn murmured against her skin. "I checked. Twice." They made love quietly, carefully, with the practiced ease of people who had learned each other's bodies over years of marriage. And afterward, lying tangled together in the hotel bed, Quinn whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Olivia asked, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "For writing me notes until I could hear again," Quinn said. "For loving me when I was broken. For building this life with me. For everything." Olivia propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him, her gray eyes serious in the lamplight. "You were never broken. You were hurt. There's a difference. And I did not love you despite the injury. I loved you because of who you are, hearing or no hearing. That would not have changed even if the surgery had failed." "I know," Quinn said, pulling her back down against him, "but I'm still grateful it worked. I am grateful I get to hear your voice and our children's voices and all the sounds of the life we have built together." "Me too," Olivia whispered. "Me too." They returned to Black Hawk a few days later, back to the store and the mountains and the rhythm of their days. Sam started helping out more around the business, showing an aptitude for numbers that pleased Quinn immensely. Clara was more interested in the social aspects, chatting with customers and making friends with everyone who came through the door. Together, they were the future of the store, and Quinn felt confident that when he and Olivia were ready to slow down, their children would be able to carry on. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons in the mountains. Sam grew tall and serious, eventually taking over much of the inventory management. Clara became a skilled seamstress, expanding the fabric section of the store into a real business of its own. They were good kids who grew into good adults, and Quinn was proud of both of them. In 1895, when Sam was 18 and beginning to court the daughter of the town blacksmith, Quinn took him aside and told him the whole story of the explosion and the silence and the notes. Sam listened with wide eyes, and when Quinn finished, he said, "I never knew it was that bad. I knew you had been injured before I was born, but I did not realize you could not hear at all." "For 8 months," Quinn confirmed, "the longest 8 months of my life, until your mother taught me how to communicate in new ways." "She saved you," Sam said softly. "She did," Quinn agreed. "But I think maybe I saved her too. She was lonely. Working in the store with just her father, watching life happen around her without being part of it. We found each other at the right time." Sam was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want that. What you and Mother have. That kind of partnership." "Then find someone who sees you clearly," Quinn advised. "Not who you pretend to be, but who you actually are. Find someone who will write you notes when you need them, whatever form those notes take. That is what love is. Clear communication and absolute honesty and showing up every single day." Sam took that advice to heart, and a year later, he married the blacksmith's daughter in a ceremony that filled the small church in Black Hawk. Clara cried through the entire wedding, and Olivia held Quinn's hand so tightly his fingers went numb. Watching his son make his vows, Quinn thought about his own wedding in that way station nearly 20 years earlier. How desperate and hopeful they had been, how everything had somehow worked out better than they could have imagined. Clara married 2 years after that, a young man who had come to Black Hawk to work the mines just like Quinn had all those years ago. Quinn walked his daughter down the aisle and gave her away with tears in his eyes. And afterward, Olivia said, "You are such a softie." "I am a father watching his children grow up," Quinn corrected. "I am allowed to be emotional." "You cried more than I did," Olivia teased, but she was smiling. "Because I'm thinking about how close I came to missing all of this," Quinn said honestly. "If the surgery had not worked, if I had died from complications, if you had not left me that first note, There are 100 ways this life could have not happened. Olivia took his face in her hands, the same way she had so many times over the years. But it did happen. We made it happen. Stop thinking about what could have gone wrong and just enjoy what went right. So Quinn did. He enjoyed watching his children build their own families. He enjoyed the store and the mountains and the way Olivia still looked at him like he was something special even after decades of marriage. He enjoyed the sound of his grandchildren playing, the sound of rain on the roof, the sound of Olivia humming while she worked. He enjoyed every single day, knowing how easily it all could have been taken from him. In the summer of 1910, Quinn and Olivia celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary. They were both in their late 50s, their hair more gray than not, their bodies showing the wear of lives well lived, but they still worked in the store together every day, still sat on the porch together every evening, still wrote each other notes sometimes when words seemed inadequate. On their anniversary, Quinn presented Olivia with a new leather-bound journal, similar to the one she had given him so many years ago. Inside the front cover, he had written, "For new notes and new adventures. I love you today as much as I did when you first wrote me that I was welcome in your store. More, actually, because now I know what a gift that welcome was. Thank you for writing me notes until I could hear again. Thank you for being my voice when I lost mine. Thank you for being my wife. Forever yours, Quinn." Olivia read it with tears in her eyes, then grabbed a pencil and wrote in the journal's first page, "Forever yours, Olivia. And thank you for learning to hear me even when I was not making a sound. That is the real miracle, I think. Not that your hearing came back, but that we learned to communicate so clearly that hearing became secondary. I love you beyond words, but I'm grateful we have words anyway." They sat together on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, the journal opened between them, and Quinn thought that this was the real ending to their story. Not the surgery or the recovery or even the children and grandchildren, though all of that mattered. The real ending was this moment, this quiet evening, with the woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved, still writing him notes after all these years, still finding new ways to say I love you. The mountains turned purple in the fading light, and somewhere in the valley below the creek sang its endless song, and Quinn Ashford, who had once lived in complete silence, listened to it all and was grateful. Their life continued in the mountains they loved, surrounded by family and the business they had built together. Sam and Clara both had children of their own, filling Quinn and Olivia's later years with the sound of grandchildren laughing and playing in the store, learning the same counter where their parents had learned, creating new memories in the space where Quinn and Olivia had first fallen in love through written words. On quiet evenings, when the store was closed and the mountains were settling in for night, Quinn and Olivia would still sit together on their porch, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, always together. And if Quinn ever started to take the sounds around him for granted, Olivia would hand him a note, written in her familiar, careful hand, reminding him of where they had started and how far they had come. The notes always said the same thing, in one form or another. I love you. I choose you. I would do it all again. And Quinn, who could hear every word she spoke but treasured her written words just as much, would write back, "Thank you for teaching me that love does not need sound to exist, but I am grateful every day that I get to hear you say it anyway." They grew old together in Black Hawk, Colorado, their love story becoming the kind of legend that people in small mountain towns tell and retell, embellishing with each telling but never quite capturing the simple truth at its core, that two people found each other in the aftermath of tragedy, learned to communicate across silence, and built a life that echoed with love long after the original silence had been broken. And on the rare occasions when Quinn's hearing would fail him, when age or illness or simple fatigue would make the world go quiet again, Olivia would reach for her pencil and paper and she would write him notes until he could hear again, just like she had promised all those years ago. Because some promises were not meant to expire. Some loves were built to last through silence and sound and everything in between. That was their story. That was their life. And it was exactly enough.